Thank you for tuning in to Macroview Television, and welcome to another edition of the Taiwan Outlook, the program that lets you see the different faces and hear the different voices of Taiwan. I'm your host, Wu Ruiguo. People often say that diplomacy is a form of art, and it makes the impossible possible, and it keeps the peace in times of inevitable conflict. If that's the case, then we are delighted and honored on today's program to have a true artist and a seasoned diplomat of the Republic of China on Taiwan to share with us his experiences of serving in the diplomatic corps over 4 decades. And he is Ambassador Loh I-Cheng. Ambassador, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Ambassador, as I mentioned earlier, that you have been serving as a diplomat for our country for over 42 years. Can you share with us some of the more memorable experiences in that long tenure?
I don't know where to begin. 42 years is a long time.
It is.
But in my memoir,
yes,
I specially cited 3 instances
please,
in which I lived through, unfortunately, and which we ended up all with mud on our faces. The first, of course, is our expulsion from the United Nations in 1971. And secondly, of course, it was in 1978, late 1978, when Jimmy Carter decided to break relations with the Republic of China. After which I was sent home as persona non grata by the Carter administration. And third time, of course, was when just before I retired, 1995, when my friend Nelson Mandela, pressured by the Communist Party of South Africa, CPSU, decided to accept the Beijing's condition and decided to break relations with us. A diplomatic practice, an accredited ambassador has to leave the country on the eve of the rupture.
Yes.
So I left Pretoria December 31st, 1994, to come home.
Okay. Out of these 3 memorable, even though unfortunate, events in your 42 careers in the, the diplomatic world, let's go back to the first one, which was the expulsion of the Republic of China from the United Nations in 1971. You're a participant and a witness of the whole process. What really happened? Was that because the formula of dual recognition was not acceptable to all parties concerned? And what were some of the other factors that led to the, our government's decision to leave the United Nations?
No, as a matter of fact, it was a combination of a lot of factors, unforeseen from the beginning.
Yes.
Because at that time, of course, we had, after the government moved itself to Taiwan back in 1949, our primary interest, diplomatic interest, was to retain our seat in the United Nations.
Okay.
For the first 10 years, that is from 51 until 1960. These were the times, if you remember, it was the Korean War. And China at that time was branded an aggressor by the United Nations.
Yes.
And the joint forces that fought, the Chinese volunteers, so to speak, were sponsored and supported by the United Nations. So in those 10 years, in that decade, in the decade of the 1950s, there was no problem of Beijing replacing Taipei in the World Assembly. The United States just said that Beijing was the aggressor in vis-a-vis South Korea.
Yes.
And so that was that. And then from after 1960, that was the 50s.
Yes.
And then in the 1960s, in those 10 years, the Beijing government has gradually expanded its circle of friends. And at that time, I remember very clearly, in the early 1960s, there's still more countries that recognize the Republic of China, vis-a-vis those that recognize the People's Republic of China. But with Beijing having solidified its position in Beijing, in all the Chinese mainland, the countries that supported us dwindled. And Canada was the first one that broke the rank. Pierre Trudeau, if you remember,
yes,
broke with the United States policy. And he recognized Beijing in 1968, I think. So, and then after which there was an avalanche. When we met in the United Nations, my position at that time was was Minister Counselor of the Embassy in Washington.
Okay.
Concurrently, a Director of the Chinese Information Service in New York. And during the last season of the year, from September until Christmas,
yes,
I was also an advisor to the ROC delegation to the United Nations General Assembly, not the permanent representative,
okay,
which was headed first by
Ambassador.
Dr. Jiang Tingfu, and then later on by Ambassador Liu Kai. So I took part every September to December. I was at the United Nations.
Okay.
At that time, of course, it was we spent all summer preparing for the battle at the United Nations, counting heads, so much so that I got to know every UN delegation of various countries that still have relations with us.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. And in Taipei, it was decided that if worst comes to worst, then we would choose to stay in the General Assembly.
Yes.
But vacating the seat, the permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council.
Okay.
We will yield that to Beijing.
Okay.
But still try to retain the seat at the General Assembly.
Yes.
That would in fact create two Chinas, but we didn't call it that. Unfortunately, a lot of things happened that year, 1971, at the United Nations. First, of course, the impact of the Canadian switch. And then secondly, we had at that time, Saudi Arabia was a staunch supporter of us, of our position there. But the Saudis at that time did not even have someone who's qualified, who's good enough to be the UN ambassador.
Well, we understand that the history at that time, especially during the 60s and the 70s, was not very friendly to our country, especially with the communist regime in China gaining recognition on the worldwide basis. It was almost inevitable that the UN membership will be an issue one of these days. And Ambassador, you mentioned that we had come up with a formula that we will give up the seat in the Security Council, but we will retain the membership at the UN General Assembly. Was that something Beijing was open to, or
no? They were not. absolutely
they want
refused.
ROC out of it.
No, Zhou Enlai at that time said very clearly they would refuse to take the seat at the Security Council if the ROC still sits in the General Assembly.
Okay.
So that dream was really popped before it ever could become a reality.
Before it really had a chance.
But on that fateful day, in late November, I think it was November 23rd or something of 1971, there were a number of other factors, principally because of the Saudi ambassador, who happened to be Lebanese in nationality.
Okay.
And it was the Saudi ambassador who proud of his own ability to speak, went up to the podium 7 times.
Okay.
That particular session of the General Assembly started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and lasted until 11 p.m.
8 hours.
8 hours. All the delegates were tired. They were hungry.
They were bombarded by all the different speeches.
Bombarded by different speeches. And so at the end, it was they really vote. Some of those who voted against us were really voting against this Saudi delegate. Because they hated his
continuous
long-winded speeches.
It's sort of like
the
a
way
filibuster.
He looked down upon all of them, because many of them were his students.
Okay. Ambassador, I'm going to ask you to take another sip of water. We're going to take a short break on our program, and when we come back, we will continue this very interesting and important conversation with Ambassador Loh I-Cheng, who has had a very distinguished 42-year career in our diplomacy. I'll see you in just a few minutes. Welcome back to the second segment of today's program here on the Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Wu Ruiguo. We will continue our conversation with Ambassador Loh I-Cheng, who has had a very distinguished 42-year career in our diplomatic service. Ambassador, we were talking about the UN membership fight, and we understand at the time you're also the Minister of Information, and you subsequently wrote an article that was published entitled "We Will Fight, We Will Die for Freedom," which was something probably wasn't very well received by the Carter administration officials. Therefore, you were subsequently, regarded as a, persona non grata, and you were asked to leave the United States on a certain, time frame. How did that happen? And what was, some of the things that was, going through your head at the time you heard about the Carter administration decision to really send you home as a diplomat?
No, it was nothing like what people imagined it to be.
Okay.
What really happened was that once Carter made the announcement to break relations with us on December 15th, 1978, and it was going to take effect from January 1st, 1979. Now, what happened was that at that time, of course, it was a lot of negotiating between Taipei and Washington at the time. What Carter wanted was, quote, unquote, people-to-people relations. And President Jiang Jingguo had insisted upon, quote, government-to-government, unquote, relations. There was even a very good joke, which probably it's not too polite to cite publicly. But it's on this point, and I think President Jiang Jingguo insisted correctly. Insisted correctly. But Carter, on the other hand, Carter was advised by Zbigniew Brzezinski. I had known Brzezinski when he was just a scholar and just head of the so-called Institute on Soviet Studies at Columbia. He even came to my apartment in New York for dinner once. What really happened was that Brzezinski, because he's Polish extraction and he hated the Soviet Union and he wanted to play the China card, so to speak. So it was him who decided to who influenced Carter, and then in Taipei, this debate between people to people or government to government.
Yes.
Ran into and become, so to speak, both sides ran into a war. And it was then that Brzezinski told Carter, he said that we want to show our determination. So they took an article which I wrote for my friend who was the editor-in-chief of the New York Daily News, because it was the largest newspaper in New York with 2.5 million daily circulation, while the New York Times always hovers between 500,000 and 750,000. It's a popular, large circulation paper. Not
Indeed.
Much depth in there, but that's what everybody on the subway reads.
Yes.
The chief editor of that newspaper, because I invited him to Taiwan before, 2 years ago before that, regards himself a good friend of the Republic of China and asked me to write a short article for it.
Of course.
So I wrote a really harmless article. What I said here was that your president has made his decision. There's nothing anybody can do about it. So please, you as reader and a supporter of the Republic of China, write your congressman, urge the Congress to continue to sell weapons to the Republic of China. I did not even criticize Carter
for the decision
for that, because what's done is done. C'est la vie.
Yeah.
So it was this article that they use as the basis to send me persona non grata back to Taiwan. The real purpose of that is not on I-Cheng Loh. It's wanted to President Jiang Jingguo to yield to the United States demand of a people-to-people relationship, that both sides should set up what we call the white gloves, 白手套. That this is what that on our side we have to set up so-called CCNAA, and on the United States they have to set up AIT, American Institute in Taiwan. That was the real reason for my expulsion from the United States. Not the article.
Not the article itself.
At all.
Okay. Let's go to the third issue that you mentioned, which was the severance of diplomatic ties with South Africa back in 1995. Of course, at the time, you were the ambassador representing the Republic of China, and you had a very good relationship, personal relationship, with President Nelson Mandela. And we tried to understand, back in those days, that South Africa was a very important diplomatic ally for us. And we tried, including former President Lee Teng-hui, made a number of visits to South Africa. But,
One visit,
I'm sorry. And then you were the ambassador there. Then you had to encounter the kinds of changes that are taking place within South Africa's domestic politics. And you said at the beginning that it was the Communist Party that forced the Mandela administration to make the switch. Can you give us further detail of what were some of the other factors that led to the decision?
From 1981 to 1990, for 9 years, I was the ambassador in Guatemala.
Okay. Yes.
I was minding my own business. I enjoyed Guatemala very much. The weather was perfect, and I had good relations. In those 8 years, they have changed 4 presidents. And each of the 4 presidents were really very, very good personal friends of mine. So I really don't have anything difficult to do. I enjoy myself. And that's how I use that opportunity to learn myself Spanish.
Yes.
I was minding my own business in Guatemala until then. At that time, you see, we had 3 important countries with whom we still have relations. Saudi Arabia,
Yes.
South Korea,
Yes.
and South Africa. Saudi Arabia was the first one to broker with us. And then they gave us 1 month time. South Korea gave us 3 days to break relations. And then South Africa, at that time, 1990, the South African longtime foreign minister, Puk Botha, I'm sure you've heard of Puk Botha, was already in Beijing, consulting with Beijing's foreign ministry. He came out of Beijing to Hong Kong, and then, out of courtesy, came to Taiwan to explain to us that what he was really worried about was what position could South Africa keep its consulate general in Hong Kong, because by 1995 Hong Kong was going to revert to Communist China. And I knew, of course, that it was something otherwise.
Yes.
So I went to South Africa with a double load on my shoulders to first to try to calm down the white regime under de Klerk. And then secondly, to establish relations with the incoming, inevitable Nelson Mandela regime. Because at that time, Mandela was, although released from jail, they had to go through the formal motion of electing him, electing a parliament. And then that parliament would elect Mandela as the president.
Of course.
So that had to be. So when I went to, went to South Africa, I had to one time trying to calm down the Botha and de Klerk. And on the other hand, I have to establish good friendly relations with Mandela immediately, almost immediately.
Yes.
And that's how I think every diplomat had his the hardest challenge,
Of course.
and also golden opportunity.
Yeah.
And Mandela, to be honest with you, was someone who doesn't hide anything. He would come out in the first and just said, you know, I would like this. And I would be telling him, okay, I'll get it for you. Or no, I cannot.
Yeah, all right.
And so we became such good friends that I could go to his office, rummage through his file, his desk. His desk is always clean, but I could peek
Always,
into any
yes.
document on
You wanted
there,
it,
and
yes.
he would let me do that.
Okay.
And on the other hand,
But Ambassador, I'm going to ask you to hold that thought a second, because we need to take another break on the program. And when we come back, we will continue this conversation with Ambassador Loh I-Cheng, who has had a very distinguished career in our diplomatic service. I'll see you in just a few minutes. Welcome back to our program here on the Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Wu Ruiguo. We will continue our discussion with Ambassador Loh I-Cheng, who has had a very distinguished career in our diplomatic service for over 42 years and certainly witnessed some of the very important diplomatic events in recent history of the Republic of China. Ambassador, we were talking about your time in South Africa as our duly designated ambassador there. And you've had a very good relationship, even on the personal level, with President Nelson Mandela. That you were sharing with us some of the experiences that you had interacting with President Mandela. I had to, sorry to cut you off, but please continue with those memories.
Because when I was nominated as ambassador to South Africa, Mandela was already released from jail, but he still had to run for the presidency the year after.
Yes.
So when I went to South Africa. On the one hand, I had to calm down Pug Botha and the other and the president on down. But on the other hand, I had to make friends with Mandela. So I went to visit him.
Yes.
And our very first encounter was really interesting. You know what?
Yes.
I think there's no secrecy about it now.
Yeah.
We sat down, and he said, Ambassador, you know, when I went to visit Singapore,
Yes.
Lee Kuan Yew gave me $10 million. When I went to Malaysia, Tunku Rahman gave me $10 million.
Okay.
When I went to Philippines, they gave me also $10 million. And then the only thing I'm unhappy about is with the Sultan of Borneo, who was supposed to be the richest man
Yes.
at that time. And he gave me only $100,000. And I laughed and I said, Mr. Mandela, $100,000 to him is like 20 cents from my pocket.
Yes.
Would you like to have 20 cents
instead? Yes.
And he laughed and I laughed.
Yes.
But anyway, I understood his message perfectly,
Yes.
and he knew that I understood him. So before the election, I accompanied him back here to see then President Lee Teng-hui.
Yeah.
And when he sat down at the presidential office, without a word, Lee Teng-hui handed him a white envelope. And they exchanged pleasantries.
Yes.
And we came out, and because accompanying him was the Treasurer General of African National Congress,
Okay.
my good friend. And he said, Mr. Ambassador, I have to go to London tomorrow. I said, why? He said, your president gave my president $10 million, and I have to deposit it into our bank account in London.
Okay. So it was really quite an experience dealing with two different administrations in South Africa.
Yes.
The one, under apartheid, and of course, later when Mr. Mandela was released. But as you can see, over the years that you spend in South Africa, it is, truly becoming somewhat a regional player in Africa today, especially when you hosted.
They are now. It's now. Well, this is a BRICS.
Yes, one of the
so-called Gold BRIC
upcoming
5 countries.
Yes.
The BRIC and the S is stands for South Africa. Yeah.
And what's your personal projection of where the country is going?
No, South Africa's doing fine.
Okay.
What really surprised me is that after Mandela's retirement, Mandela's now very old. He's 90-something. He's 95 now, I think.
Okay.
And he wasted no time in enjoying his retirement.
Okay.
The government supplies him with everything, including 3 secretaries
Yes.
and the house and everything. But the present right now, the current president, also a good friend of mine. At that time, because after Mandela and before the one now, there's the interregnum. There was an interregnum of, what's his name, Mbeki, Thabo Mbeki.
All right.
Thabo was the one who made the switch of recognition.
Okay.
The reason was simple. The reason was that the African National Congress, somewhat like the Kuomintang here, inside it has it's a church. It has many schools.
Okay.
So the Kuomintang now has this and
Faction
that.
and things.
Yes, these various factions.
Okay.
And one of which, the most important faction, was the SACP, South Africa Communist Party. And at that time, I had no secret with Mandela. I said, Mr. President, you know what the ANC is like.
Okay.
The ANC, the brain, is the SACP.
Yes.
The arm is the General Union. Is the General Union because it gives it muscle.
Yeah.
And then the rest of body are the various factions that make up your African National Congress.
Yes.
And he laughed. He said, Ambassador Loh, you hit the nail on the head.
Yes, that's a very vivid description of the politics there. Yes.
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 And so people do not know that the South Africa Communist Party was really the soul of ANC.
Okay.
And they were under tremendous pressure because the SACP was and always has been funded by the CCP,
Yes.
by the Chinese Communist Party. And it was the struggle, therefore, was between us and the CCP. So
Yes.
when I left, the Mandela told me, Ambassador, you know, for you to have lasted here 7 years was quite a record.
It's quite an achievement, yes. And also, Ambassador, we understand that during the Korean War, you worked for the United States as an interrogator. And for that service, you were subsequently awarded the Medal of Freedom by President Dwight Eisenhower in 1954. Can you tell us what that particular experience meant to you, and also what did the award meant to you? This is very rare that a foreigner will receive such a high honor from the United States.
It was, we went there as interpreter.
Yes.
But it so happens that I was attached to the 10th United States Corps,
Right.
which was fighting on the Eastern Front. And opposite us were not Chinese volunteers, so to speak, but the North Korean army. And therefore, I had to use one of those overseas Chinese in Korea who speaks Chinese plus Korean to use an interpreter.
Yes.
And so how do I make my reports interesting? Most others would say, oh, this man is... But because I had journalistic training,
Yes.
so my reports were very long, at least 12, 15 pages.
Okay.
If we had a North Korean prisoner, I would ask him, you know, where were you trained? How do you move up to the front? Because of the U.S. bombing. So they could not move any troops in daylight.
No.
They always sleep during the day and then walk during the night. And then gradually they came up to the front. And how they replaced the former fighters. Division replaced the division, and then regiment replaced the regiment, and then up to the frontline platoon. Yes. My report would always rate will always send back not only to Ridgway's headquarters, General Ridgway, but also to Tokyo, to the U.S. General. Okay. And they said this man's analytical report gave them an understanding of how the Chinese Communist forces and the Northern forces do their fighting, train their men, and so on and so forth. Okay. And that's how, after 3 years,
yes,
I figure I saved enough money to go to this to study at Columbia's School of Journalism. Okay. I quit. All right. And when I came back to Taiwan, I got married.
Yes.
And then suddenly, just before marriage, suddenly the American embassy called me, Mr. Loh.
Okay.
The ambassador.
All right.
Wanted to invite you to a ceremony.
Okay, before you share that good news with us, we need to take the final break on today's program here on the Taiwan Outlook. And when we come back, we will put Ambassador Loh I-Cheng to more questions, including some of the advice that he can give to people who are watching our program today but are interested in a career in foreign service. I'll see you in just a few minutes. Welcome back to the final part of today's program here on the Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Rui Guo. We will continue our discussion with Ambassador Loh I-Cheng, who has had a very distinguished career in our diplomatic service and also is going to have some advice for people who are thinking of such a career in our foreign service. And Ambassador, I'm going to ask you that we know that you received this call back in 1954 from the U.S. Embassy. And the ambassador, informed you that you are getting a very distinguished award from the United States government. Can you give us the background of the phone call and the subsequent ceremony?
It was Ambassador Cao Rankin's office who called.
All right.
And asked me if I could be a certain place.
Certain time.
Time. I said, sure. And so I went. I had just married a week ago and was going to leave for the United States shortly to study at Columbia. So to my surprise, I was awarded the Medal of Freedom because of those reports I wrote when I was interrogating North Korean and Chinese prisoners of war in there. Okay. Obviously, the Supreme Headquarters in Tokyo regarded these reports as very helpful.
Yes. And
they recommended to do it, of which I had no knowledge of whatsoever.
Yes. All right. Ambassador, we understand that after your tenure in South Africa that you came back to Taiwan, and you were appointed the ambassador at large by our foreign ministry, and then in which you subsequently resigned back in the year 2000. And we understand that you have been very active since then, giving a lot of speeches and lectures, and also occasionally appearing on television and different media, sharing your thoughts and views of what's happening around the world.
No, that's not. That's
my
not
apology.
The case.
No, oh, okay.
It's. I was appointed to get three of us.
Oh, okay.
Chiu Hong-dai in Washington.
Yes.
And then Jeffrey Gu Lian-song, and I were appointed the ambassador at large.
Okay.
It was the first batch of them.
Okay.
Chiu, of course, was in Washington, never came back.
No.
And Jeffrey was the banker. And he laughingly said all he did was inviting those foreign bankers to dinner. But I had to go to the foreign office on the 5th floor. They gave me a special office on the 5th floor next to the vice ministers, without pay, mind you, because I had retired and I was drawing the so-called 18% from my retirement check. But however, at that time, If you remember, we had just established relations with one European, a real country besides the Holy See.
Yeah, Macedonia.
Yes, and that was Macedonia. And I had to go to Macedonia not just once, but 3 times. The first time I went with then Foreign Minister Jason Hu. The second time I went with the then Prime Minister Winston Chiu.
Yes.
And the third time, because Chen Shui-bian had been elected and although not yet assumed office, nobody wanted to go. So I became the head of the delegation and led a group to Macedonia and signed an agreement with them, establishing a export processing zone in Macedonia. So I actually worked for no salary at all.
All right. So that was public service after your distinguished career. But we understand, the Ambassador, very unfortunately last year that you experienced a car accident, and now you have, fully recovered, and then you've been pushing a public campaign for the right of pedestrians in Taiwan. Can you tell us how did you come up with such a campaign, and how is the progress coming along in such a civic campaign?
Actually, I didn't push anything at all. It was, excuse me, it was public sentiment.
Yes.
Because I was crossing
the
pedestrian zone legally and with a lot of people.
Yes.
And there was this taxi who wanted to left turn and just he thought I would stop. Of course, I didn't even see him. He was turning left. And he ran me down, and I fell down and was hurt.
Yes.
Later on, I realized, the man, of course, was remorseful. Came and visited me at the hospital. And then apologized. And I forgave him because I realized the basic problem was, of course, it was his fault. But the basic problem was that Taiwan had too many taxis.
Yes.
Taipei alone had 50,000 taxis. And often you would run into a taxi from Taoyuan or from Keelung, which happened to be here and might as well pick up a fare.
Yes.
And this is what happens. So the real reason is that we had too many taxis circling the streets. And therefore the profit margin was very low, and everybody has to fight for time. That's the reason I forgave him.
What has been the result so far in raising public awareness for the rights of pedestrians?
Hopefully, they're now more respectful toward the pedestrians' rights if they were crossing the so-called 斑马线.
Yes.
I just hope so.
But
unless you solve the basic problem, which is that there simply are too many taxis in Taiwan, and everybody was just eking out a living. You have to solve, if you solve a problem. That's how I learned in my lifetime's work. You have to go to the root of the problem, not the surface.
Ambassador, we understand that you also been a very keen observer of the domestic political development over the last few years. You've occasionally written articles commenting on what's happening on the international stage as well as happening here at home. What are your observations as we becoming a more mature democracy and also with cross-strait relations improving under President Ma Ying-jeou?
I think you could look at it from 2 angles. The first angle, of course, is that Taiwan stands on its own feet. This is the reason that when a Taiwanese goes to the mainland, he gets a permit to roam around there for 3 months. And when the mainlander comes here, it was first only 10 days. Then after I wrote an article, then it extended to 12 days. And now, after the 5th Jiang Bingkun and Chen Yinling meeting last year, now it's extended to 15 days. This is our superiority. And I'm quite certain that as the mainland comes to know more and more about Taiwan, they will have to emulate us.
Yes.
And this is why I have ultimate confidence in our ability to change the mainland, not the other way around.
Okay. Finally, for the final question of today's program, Ambassador, you've had such a distinguished career in both, media and also in public service. And there are many people who are watching our program today around the world, maybe thinking of doing something similar to what you had. And what would be your word of advice, especially for the younger generations out there who are thinking of a career, whether in journalism or in foreign service? What would be the recommendations that you would make to them?
Work hard, study hard.
Yes.
And try to do the best you could. That's it.
Okay. And we understand that there are many choices, in life. And Ambassador, if I may ask you, that you obviously have many opportunities in your life. You could become a very distinguished, journalist and had a wonderful career in the private sector, but you chose instead to serve the government, serve the people. And this has been a very long process and also a very arduous process. And if you had the opportunity of doing, making the choice again, doing it over, would you make the same decision?
I think I would make the same decision for various reasons. Number one, I don't have the mind of a businessman.
Okay.
Never could. Never could make too much money.
Okay.
But secondly, it's I threw myself into whatever I was doing.
Very committed.
And do the utmost that I could. And this is, I think, if I had the chance to start all over again, I think I probably follow the same path.
Okay, good. Ambassador Loh, it's been truly an honor and a pleasure to have you here on the program. And for me personally, I have learned so much from just 1 hour conversation with you. On behalf of all the production team that we have for the program, we would like to wish you health and happiness this year and always.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wu.
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank you for watching our program today on the Taiwan Outlook. I'll see you next time on Macroview Television. Thank you.